In a decision that could reshape American trade policy for years to come, the United States Supreme Court has ruled that former President Donald Trump's sweeping emergency tariffs are illegal. This is not a minor policy adjustment. This is a major constitutional ruling, a ruling that questions the limits of presidential power, a ruling that could affect more than $150 billion in collected tariff revenue, and a ruling that now leaves businesses, lawmakers, and global markets asking one key question: what happens next? Here's everything you need to know. The Supreme Court struck down the core of Trump's emergency tariff program, finding that the president overstepped his legal authority when imposing broad tariffs under emergency powers. The case centered on Trump's use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, commonly known as IEPA. EPA is a law passed in 1977. It gives the president authority to respond to unusual and extraordinary foreign threats during a declared national emergency. Traditionally, that authority has been used to freeze assets, block financial transactions, or impose targeted economic sanctions. But the Trump administration used it in a much broader way. It used emergency authority to impose wide-ranging tariffs across major sectors of the global economy. The Supreme Court has now said that went too far. The ruling, delivered on Friday, represents a significant legal defeat for Trump's trade agenda. CNN's senior legal analyst described the decision as monumental, and that word is not an exaggeration, because at the heart of this case is a fundamental constitutional question: who controls trade policy in the United States? The president or Congress? The Constitution grants Congress the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and to lay and collect taxes and duties. Tariffs function as taxes on imports. That means they directly fall under congressional authority. Congress has, over time, delegated some trade authority to the executive branch. But the Supreme Court made clear in this ruling that delegation must be clear and specific. According to the majority opinion, EPA does not clearly authorize sweeping long-term tariffs affecting broad sectors of the economy. Regulating transactions during an emergency is one thing. Imposing massive tariffs on global imports is another. The court drew a firm line between the two. The justices found Trump exceeded the scope of the law when he used emergency powers to enact wide tariff measures. The ruling effectively invalidates those tariffs. That immediately raises enormous practical questions, because these tariffs were not symbolic. They generated serious revenue. More than $150 billion has been collected under these measures, according to figures cited in coverage. Now, the legal system must determine what happens to that money. Will businesses receive refunds? Will the government be required to repay companies that paid these tariffs? If refunds are ordered, how far back will they go? Will interest be included? And how will such repayments be funded? The Supreme Court did not answer all of those questions directly. Instead, the matter may move through lower courts to sort out the logistical and financial details. Legal analysts warn that the process could be complex and lengthy. This could trigger one of the largest trade-related financial disputes in recent memory. The segment also emphasized the broader implications of the decision. This ruling is not just about Trump. It is about executive authority. It sends a message about how far a president can go when interpreting emergency powers. The court's reasoning reinforces a legal principle that major economic actions require clear congressional authorization. Presidents cannot rely on vague statutory language to implement policies with massive economic consequences. That principle could affect future administrations as well. Politically, reactions are already intense. Supporters of the ruling argue that it restores constitutional balance. They say Congress, not the president, should decide when and how tariffs are imposed. Critics argue the decision limits presidential flexibility in responding to global economic threats. Trump has built much of his economic message around aggressive trade action. This ruling challenges that strategy, and it could influence future campaign debates over trade and economic nationalism. Let's talk about the economic side. Tariffs impact prices. Economists have long debated who ultimately pays the cost of tariffs. Many studies suggest that much of the burden falls on American consumers and businesses, not foreign producers. If these tariffs are permanently removed, certain import prices could decline. Manufacturers relying on imported components could see cost relief. Retailers might experience improved margins, but those changes would not happen overnight. Trade contracts, supply chains, and pricing systems take time to adjust. and any replacement trade measures could alter the outcome. CNN's coverage also highlighted uncertainty about how quickly the tariffs will unwind. Some may be halted immediately. Others may remain in effect temporarily depending on legal procedures. The administration could attempt to implement alternative tariff mechanisms under different laws. There are other statutory tools available. For example, Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act allows tariffs for national security reasons. Section 301 of the Trade Act allows tariffs in response to unfair trade practices. However, any new action would likely face scrutiny in light of this Supreme Court ruling. Internationally, the decision may shift diplomatic dynamics. Countries targeted by broad tariffs may view the ruling as a stabilizing development. Trade disputes over the past several years have led to retaliatory tariffs and strained relationships. If U.S. trade policy becomes more dependent on congressional approval, foreign governments may perceive greater predictability. However, uncertainty remains. Markets tend to react strongly to legal and policy changes. Investors are now analyzing how this decision will influence long-term trade stability. Another important element is the legal doctrine underlying the ruling. Legal observers note that the court continues to reinforce limits on expansive executive interpretations of old statutes. In recent years, the court has signaled skepticism toward broad administrative authority without explicit legislative backing. This trade decision fits within that broader pattern. It suggests that sweeping economic changes must be clearly authorized by Congress. That doctrine may appear again in future cases involving environmental regulation, healthcare mandates, or immigration policy. From a governance perspective, this shifts responsibility back to lawmakers. If Congress wants broad tariff authority to remain with the president, it must say so clearly. That would require legislative action. And legislative action means political accountability, votes, debate, public scrutiny. Trade policy is rarely simple. Different industries have different interests. Agriculture, manufacturing, technology, and retail sectors all approach tariffs differently. If Congress re-enters the center of trade policymaking, those debates will intensify. For American businesses, clarity is critical. Companies make long-term investment decisions based on predictable trade environments. Uncertainty can delay expansion, hiring, and capital spending. This ruling provides clarity on one front. Emergency powers have limits, but it opens new uncertainty about what policies may replace the invalidated tariffs. Corporate leaders will be watching Washington closely. For workers, the outcome may vary by industry. Some domestic producers supported tariffs as protection against foreign competition. Others, especially exporters facing retaliatory tariffs, opposed them. If retaliatory tariffs ease in response to U.S. policy shifts, certain sectors could benefit. But those developments depend on diplomatic negotiations. It is also worth noting that Supreme Court rulings often outlast the administrations involved. Presidents come and go, but constitutional precedents remain. This case will likely be cited in future disputes over executive authority. Law students will study it, scholars will debate it, policymakers will reference it. In that sense, this ruling may shape the legal landscape long after current political battles fade. As of now, the next steps are procedural. Lower courts will examine the mechanics of unwinding the tariffs. Lawmakers may introduce new trade legislation. The administration may explore alternative legal pathways, and businesses may prepare refund claims. Each of these steps could generate new headlines. This story is far from over. What we know today is this. The Supreme Court has ruled that President Trump's emergency tariffs were illegal. The court determined that the law he relied upon did not grant sufficient authority for sweeping long-term trade measures. More than $150 billion in tariff revenue is now under scrutiny. And the balance of power between Congress and the presidency in matters of trade has been reaffirmed. This is a developing story with major economic and political implications. If you want continued coverage, clear analysis, and updates as refund battles and legislative responses unfold, make sure you stay connected. Subscribe for ongoing reporting. Like this video if you found this breakdown helpful, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you agree with the court's decision, or should presidents have broader authority to act swiftly on trade? Let's discuss, and stay tuned, because the next chapter in America's trade policy is just beginning. The implications of this ruling go far beyond the immediate tariff measures. It represents a defining moment in the ongoing conversation about the limits of presidential authority in economic policy. For decades, presidents have used broadly worded statutes to implement sweeping policies, sometimes with minimal congressional oversight. The Supreme Court's decision sends a clear message. Broad, unilateral economic action is no longer a safe path without explicit legislative authorization. This is particularly significant in the realm of trade policy. Trade touches nearly every sector of the U.S. economy, from manufacturing and agriculture to technology and retail. Decisions that affect imports and exports ripple through supply chains, impact employment, and influence pricing for everyday consumers. By striking down these emergency tariffs, the court has effectively reaffirmed that the most significant levers of economic power belong to Congress, ensuring that such decisions remain subject to the democratic process. For businesses, the ruling offers both clarity and uncertainty. On one hand, it removes the legal cloud that hung over companies navigating the complex tariff landscape created by the Trump administration. Firms that had been paying emergency tariffs may now seek refunds, and those engaged in import-export activity can adjust their strategies without fear of sudden, legally vulnerable duties. On the other hand, the path forward is uncertain. Congress could act to reauthorize similar tariffs under a clearer statutory framework, and the administration could attempt to implement alternative measures. The result is a period of economic recalibration as companies, investors, and policymakers weigh the potential outcomes. The court's decision also highlights the broader concept of accountability and governance. By placing clear limits on executive action, the ruling emphasizes that significant policy decisions, especially those with profound economic consequences, cannot be made unilaterally. This ensures that elected representatives in Congress are directly responsible for the creation and implementation of policies that affect the lives of millions of Americans. In practice, it may encourage more robust debate, amendments, and oversight in the legislative process, leading to more thoughtful and sustainable policy solutions. From a legal standpoint, this case reinforces the major questions doctrine, which has become increasingly central in Supreme Court jurisprudence. Under this principle, when the executive branch takes action with wide-ranging economic or political implications, courts require clear congressional authorization. This doctrine has previously been applied in cases involving environmental regulation, public health measures, and administrative agency authority. By applying it to trade, the court has expanded its influence across another critical domain, signaling to future administrations that expansive interpretations of broad statutes may face judicial scrutiny. Internationally, the ruling could have far-reaching effects. For trading partners, the decision introduces a layer of predictability. Countries previously targeted by broad U.S. tariffs can anticipate that sweeping unilateral measures are now constrained by legal and legislative boundaries. This may encourage more collaborative approaches to trade negotiations, reduce the risk of retaliatory tariffs, and stabilize global trade relationships. However, uncertainty remains regarding which tariffs may be reintroduced under alternative legal mechanisms and how future trade negotiations will be conducted. The economic impact extends to consumers, who bear the brunt of tariffs through higher prices on imported goods. With the invalidation of these emergency tariffs, Americans could see reduced costs for a wide range of products. Electronics, clothing, machinery, and agricultural imports may gradually become more affordable. Businesses that rely on imported materials could experience lower input costs, potentially increasing profitability or enabling price reductions for consumers. However, these effects will take time to materialize as supply chains, contracts, and production schedules adjust to the new legal landscape. The ruling also has political ramifications. Trade policy has long been a central element in presidential campaigns, influencing voters' perceptions of economic strength, nationalism, and global competitiveness. By limiting the executive branch's unilateral power, the court has shifted the debate back to Congress. This could lead to more detailed legislative proposals, robust public debate, and clear accountability for trade-related decisions. Lawmakers will likely face intense lobbying from industries affected by tariffs, creating a dynamic intersection of politics, economics, and law. Furthermore, this decision may influence the strategy of future administrations. Presidents will need to ensure that any significant trade measures are grounded in clear statutory authority. Attempts to bypass Congress or rely on broadly worded emergency powers could face swift legal challenges. This may encourage a more collaborative approach between the executive and legislative branches, ultimately creating more stable and predictable trade policy. For industries, the stakes are high. U.S. manufacturers that supported tariffs as a protective measure may need to adjust to increased foreign competition if replacement tariffs are not implemented. Agricultural exporters who faced retaliatory tariffs may see potential relief, but only if diplomatic negotiations align with domestic legal frameworks. Retailers and consumers stand to benefit from reduced costs, but the overall economic picture depends on how Congress, the administration, and international partners respond to the court's ruling. The legal ramifications are equally profound. The decision reinforces the importance of statutory clarity in delegating authority to the executive branch. Courts are signaling that broad, ambiguous grants of power will not suffice for major policy actions. This precedent could extend to other areas where the president exercises authority under vaguely worded statutes, including environmental regulation, healthcare policy, and national security measures. Lawyers, scholars, and policymakers will study this case for years as they navigate the boundaries of executive power. The refund issue remains a significant concern. Companies that paid these tariffs may seek reimbursement for billions in fees already collected. The process of determining eligibility, calculating amounts, and distributing refunds could take years. It may involve complex litigation and coordination between courts, the Treasury Department, and other agencies. The financial and administrative burden is enormous, underscoring the importance of legal clarity in major policy decisions. In addition, the ruling underscores the role of the judiciary as a check on executive power. By limiting the president's ability to unilaterally impose sweeping tariffs, the Supreme Court has reinforced the principle of separation of powers. This serves as a reminder that even in matters of national interest or perceived economic necessity, the executive branch operates within a framework of legal and constitutional constraints. The decision also carries lessons for voters and citizens. It highlights the importance of understanding how economic policy is crafted, who holds the authority to make those decisions, and how legal oversight ensures accountability. Citizens may not feel the immediate effects of the ruling, but over time, tariff policy influences prices, wages, job opportunities, and the broader economic climate. Understanding these dynamics is crucial for informed participation in democratic processes. Global markets will be closely monitoring the implementation of this decision. Investors value stability, and the Supreme Court's ruling introduces both clarity and uncertainty. While it removes the legal threat of emergency-based tariffs, it opens questions about future trade policy. Replacement measures, congressional legislation, and international negotiations will all influence market expectations and economic forecasts. Moreover, the ruling may shape the conduct of future presidents and administrations. It reinforces the necessity of adhering to statutory boundaries and consulting with Congress when implementing significant economic measures. This may encourage a more measured, strategic approach to trade policy, balancing national interests with legal and diplomatic considerations. For Congress, the decision presents both a challenge and an opportunity. Lawmakers may be called upon to draft clearer, more specific legislation to authorize trade actions in the future. This requires careful negotiation, input from industry stakeholders, and consideration of domestic and international economic impacts. In effect, the ruling shifts responsibility back to the legislative branch, emphasizing transparency, accountability, and democratic decision-making. Legal scholars have noted that this case could become a landmark precedent. By applying the major questions doctrine to trade policy, the Supreme Court has established a framework that will influence judicial interpretation in other areas of law. It signals that courts are willing to scrutinize expansive interpretations of statutory authority, especially when the policy in question has far-reaching economic consequences. For American workers, the effects of this ruling will vary across sectors. Industries that benefited from tariffs as a shield against foreign competition may need to adapt. Exporters who faced retaliatory measures could see new opportunities if tariffs are rolled back or renegotiated. Consumer-facing industries may benefit from reduced costs, potentially leading to improved margins or increased hiring. The real impact will depend on how quickly policy adjustments are made and how global markets respond. Diplomatically, the ruling may stabilize relationships with U.S. trading partners. Countries previously targeted by broad tariffs may view the decision as a step toward more predictable trade policy. Reduced unilateral action by the executive branch could facilitate negotiations and encourage multilateral agreements. However, the possibility of replacement measures under alternative legal authorities means that uncertainty is not entirely eliminated. Looking forward, several milestones will be critical to watch. First, lower court proceedings regarding refunds and the unwinding of tariffs will determine the financial and logistical implications. Second, congressional action to clarify trade authority could reshape the legal and policy landscape. Third, any new executive measures must align with statutory authority, and their legality may be tested in court. Each of these steps could generate significant economic and political developments. It is also important to recognize the symbolic weight of this decision. Beyond the practical economic impact, it serves as a reminder that constitutional limits exist even in areas of perceived national importance. By reaffirming the role of Congress in shaping trade policy, the Supreme Court has emphasized the principle of shared governance and the importance of checks and balances. The decision will likely influence political discourse for years. Trade policy is a recurring theme in campaigns and public debate. By constraining executive authority, the court has ensured that future discussions of tariffs and trade measures will involve explicit legislative action, recorded votes, and clear accountability. This may encourage more transparent policymaking and provide voters with clearer choices in elections. For businesses, consumers, lawmakers, and international partners alike, the message is clear. Sweeping economic action requires a solid legal foundation. The ruling demonstrates that even well-intentioned policies can face legal challenges if they exceed statutory authority. Understanding this dynamic is critical for anyone involved in trade policy or governance. In conclusion, the Supreme Court's decision to strike down Trump's emergency tariffs represents a landmark moment in U.S. legal, economic, and political history. It clarifies the limits of presidential power, reinforces the importance of congressional authorization, and highlights the complex interplay between law, economics, and governance. The effects will ripple through markets, businesses, consumers, and policy debates for years to come. Refund claims, replacement measures, congressional action, and international negotiations will shape the next chapters of American trade policy. The court's ruling has not ended the debate. It has simply redefined the rules of engagement. If you want to stay informed on this developing story, understand how it affects you as a consumer, a worker, or a business owner, and follow the ongoing battle over trade and presidential authority, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Hit the like button if this analysis helped you understand the ruling, and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think presidents should have broad trade powers, or is this Supreme Court decision the right check on executive authority? Turn on notifications so you never miss a breaking update, because as this story continues to unfold, we will keep you informed every step of the way. Stay with us, because the next chapter in U.S. trade policy is just beginning.